I am Mark Ramsey. I am thrilled to welcome Gordon Borrell. Everybody knows Gordon Borrell. Gordon is head of Borrell Associates, and welcome, Gordon.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I'm super thrilled. Listen, you've got another benchmarking local media's digital revenues report out, and it's really so fascinating. I want to give you kind of a chance to kind of talk about how this one differs from ones you've done in the past as it relates to the audio space in particular. And then we can get into some of the details and the best practices and what broadcasters need to be doing and so on. I just want to first get a sense of what's different here.
Sure. I think after 15 years, basically, of doing these reports, you really either see a pattern or you're stupid. And the pattern is that the gorge between those, and it's really kind of insensitive to say it this way, but I'm going to say it anyway, those who get it and those who don't. And that really is unfair because there are people who kind of get it, but they don't have the resources, the buy-in from above, the finances to be able to move quicker and do things. But there is certainly, I think, in this report that we see a gorge widening between the people who really understand what the future looks like and those who are either in denial or just can't really do anything about it.
What does the percent of overall revenue from digital look like for those who get it and can act on that knowledge?
Well, that's not the greatest barometer. It is one, and it's a good one that we include in the report. But we say it's not the greatest one because it assumes that if you have a percentage of revenue, total advertising revenue at your station that is from digital, that's higher than everybody else's, you're doing well. Well, I can tell you how to make that 100%. It just stop selling radio.
Well, of course.
So it assumes, as we say, that you're going to sell the hell out of radio and be really, really aggressive in digital. The average for radio is about 6-7%. So about 6% of total ad revenues coming from digital is average. And those who are doing really well, I think, are in the 7, 8, 9, 10%. There are some a little bit above that. And again, it assumes that they're kicking ass on the radio side, on the broadcast side, and maintaining that level. Because if they were falling down there, but kind of doing okay in digital, they would look like a best practice, but they would actually be just kind of doing okay in digital, and they would actually suck in radio.
Right, and clearly it's the intention of any broadcaster to sustain traditional revenue to whatever degree they can and grow the digital side. But I recognize your point that that isn't necessarily how it works.
Let me mention something else, if you don't mind, in conjunction with that, Mark, and that is what irritates me a lot when people are looking at digital is, and it happens in radio, it happens in every medium, is that there are so many radio stations that are so accustomed to looking at other radio stations as the competitors. They're in-market competitors. Their number one competitor is radio. And they're doing the same in digital. So they're comparing or benchmarking themselves against other radio stations. And that makes them, if they're really, really good in a market, the tallest of the pygmies. Because radio doesn't traditionally do all that well. There are some stations doing really, really well. And what they've done is they've broadened their horizon. And they've looked at other competitors doing really well in digital, newspapers, yellow pages, television stations, and seeing what they're doing. So I gave you a figure a few minutes ago of 6 or 7% on average for radio, and some doing well at 10, 11, 12%. The Washington Post gets 79% of its total ad revenue from digital. 79 frickin' percent. Yellow Pages companies get 40, 50, 60% from digital. Newspapers are at 12, 17, 25% overall. And yeah, it means that their core product revenues have declined and their digital product revenues are increasing. But when you look at what they're doing, because they're threat motivated, they have to do this or their product declines. Radio doesn't really have to do this. It's optional. Audio, podcasting, say what you will about Pandora and the others. Pandora really doesn't affect advertising revenues for a station in a smaller rural market, which is the vast majority of the country, really. So it's not. So look at the threat-motivated guys if you really, really want to do well, and don't just look within the radio industry and say, I want to do what other radio folks are doing.
So by that logic, should I assume that radio, even in the larger markets, is not threatened in the same way as some of these other media are?
They are. I think you have a lot of odd, different kind of competition for radio in larger markets as well as in the smaller markets, but in larger markets in particular. Here's what's happening. Here's the really interesting thing that worries me more about radio than, say, podcasting and some upstart podcasting company or Pandora and things like that. It's cable. It's really clear. We run the largest survey of local advertisers in the U.S. every year. It's ongoing now. If anybody wants to see more about it, they go to our website. We have charts of the week. They're really fascinating insights coming out of it. Here's one that affects radio, and it kind of sucks. It's tough. Cable has come up very, very quickly in the past year in terms of preference of local advertisers to buy. And the thing that people are taking money from, one of the things, is radio to buy cable. Cable to the local advertiser is television advertising. They don't make a distinction so much between broadcast and cable. It's, hey, I'm going to be on TV and I have a really targeted commercial on the Oxygen Network or Lifetime Network or the History Channel, whatever. It's locally targeted stuff. And they love that. They can afford it because cable is generally cheap. So what? I mean, guess what? So is radio. Mm-hmm. So my concern is that in these local markets, big and in some small markets too, the cable guys know a lot about digital. And that is obviously the nectar that's helping sell advertising. Having a rep that really, really knows about digital, saying, oh yeah, we can wrap together this great package, and guess what we're going to use to drive traffic to your Facebook page, your social media site, your website, etc. Cable advertising. And hey, it's just as expensive or just as cheap as radio advertising. You ought to buy it. That's what's happening in these larger markets today. Is the cable guys are pretty darn savvy, maybe more so than the radio reps when it comes to digital.
So what you're talking about is digital services being kind of wrapped in with the core proposition, cable in that case, radio in the broadcast case, and the large medium, so to speak, the cable, the radio being used to drive attention towards those other destinations. Now, that's a strength that clearly is not unique to cable operators. Radio broadcasters could do that as well. In some cases, they are. I guess my question is, today, I think it was, you put out a pie chart that showed local digital services. And it was a massive pie chart with 1 million tiny slices. And these were all the people who had a piece of the pie, and then a very few significant slices that belonged to the Facebooks of the world, the LinkedIns of the world, and so on. So my question is, if everyone is doing it and everyone's getting an infinitesimal slice of these digital services, then where is the competitive advantage in wrapping your core asset around that if it's not something that you can own uniquely?
First of all, it's a necessary evil, I think, for radio or for any media company. Let's say you didn't make commercials, you didn't do recording. An advertiser came to you and said, "Oh yeah, I'd like to do a 30-second spot." You go, "Well, we don't record them. You're going to have to go find somebody else." So they go and they talk to somebody else, and that somebody else is going to give them marketing advice, right? Mm-hmm. And they might also say, well, you really don't need to buy this station. You should buy that station, or you should buy some cable advertising or newspaper. We do newspaper ads as well. So it's the same thing that's occurring. All of these little providers, and if you noticed in that chart, that was a cool chart, by the way.
That was an amazing
in that chart. We highlighted a couple of things, and they were providers that were tagged as wife, son-in-law, and relative. So
I'm amazed that son-in-law outscores son. That says something, and I'm not sure what, but
that's right. So do you really want, if you run a radio station, do you really want your advertiser going to someone else to get marketing advice about anything, but particularly their website, their social media page, and things like that? So when you factor out all the little one-offs, the son-in-laws, the wives, the whoever who's doing it, and internally, in a lot of cases, these people do not have marketing savvy. They're marketing idiots to a great extent. Everybody thinks they know something about marketing, but they don't. Guess who does in the local market? Local media companies, particularly radio. They're very promotion oriented. They're actually pretty graphically oriented as well. Certainly audio and potentially video oriented. And all these play very, very nicely into how a radio station can help an advertiser with what they really, really want and what they really need, which is social media presence and website presence and things like that. They're all, trust me, Mark, they're all so focused on all of that stuff that they can put on the web and promote themselves, that the person who comes in the door and talks with them about that in an intelligent way and says, let me handle that, they're going to make a little bit of money, but they're also going to be highly influential in what that advertiser buys next.
What do we do about the problem that the base of knowledge in radio brands, radio stations, radio companies in this area isn't that great?
Train the reps. That's very clear. There are loads of companies out there, and I believe the RAB has a really good program, and it's always getting better in digital certification and training your reps. That's a very, very good basis and the place to start. There are other programs out there, different. I won't name names because I name one or two, and the other 20 will come after me. That I do think have very good digital programs. The way to tell is to go and start talking with them about digital and their digital prowess and how much they know. And if they start turning the conversation back to your core product and the radio, that's a warning sign. Mm-hmm. You really want to know that someone has a very, very strong digital understanding, a digital education, and it's a very strong component. You already know about radio, so what are you going to need them, to help you with that? So I do think that training is important with the larger companies, the Beasleys, the CBSs, the Entercoms, Cumulus, et cetera. There's typically an internal training program. For the smaller ones that might have 4 or 5 clusters at most, or maybe just a couple of stations, outsourcing is really the best way to do it.
So then digital services in general, these kinds of digital services, you would view at least as table stakes, irrespective of the fact that you're competing broadly against all other media and the son-in-law of your client to provide them. So that makes sense. Now, earlier you said that that some get it, some don't. Some get it and aren't able to act on it. Here's what I'm wondering. For the people who get it and aren't able to act on it or aren't able to achieve kind of the percentage heights that you indicated, what structurally needs to happen? I mean, what is the difference between the structure of the brands who get it and act on it and the structure of the brands who either don't get it or get it and don't act on it?
Well, I think you need to seriously consider quitting if you get it and your company doesn't. The future doesn't look good, and you need to just take a look at, where am I going to be in 5 or 10 years if I stay with this particular company? You have a responsibility, I think, to go pound the table of your boss or your boss's boss, and say, look, we really need to do this. This could fall apart. This is an opportunity. And to fight the objectives, which is I want to stay focused on our core product, that's tough enough, or there's not enough margin in these digital services and these digital products, that's bullshit. Or there's so much digital fraud, this stuff is going to collapse. You really need to leave if you begin to hear those things, or try to educate the owners. But that's a tough proposition. So I do need I do say that you really need to help educate your organization. And it really has to come from the top, from the owner and the general manager, in that order. If you're at a bigger company and they're just strapped financially, and there's some out there, I would also consider leaving. But I also have to think that, you have to take a look at, you can just call them stupid and they didn't plan for the future, and that's really unfair. There are a lot of companies, large and small, that are in just some really tough situations that can't hire and just can't compete digitally. Mm-hmm. And, I don't know what to do in that case other than to ride it out. Radio is not going to disappear tomorrow or next week or 5 years from now. It's still a fairly strong medium. I don't think it's going to grow again. If it is, we're already going, hey, 1 or 2% growth. Well, look at the growth of GDP this year. It is shrinking. Mm-hmm. Not GDP is growing, but radio is shrinking, even if it grows at 1 or 2%. So that's not a good thing and not a good position to be in.
Is there anything to be made from the fact, and your report details this, that the people with the bigger slices of the digital pie, when you look at the annual gains or losses for those companies, they're mostly red, and in some cases increasingly red as it gets more current. I mean, what do you take from that? I mean, do you take that winning means losing, or that these are investments in the future? What's the takeaway from that?
But what you're referring to is that there are a number of companies. I think we put out one chart that showed 10 companies that had losses last year, and some were pretty significant, in the tens to hundreds of millions of dollars in losses. And there are some like Angie's List, which has been around since the mid 90s, who've made money only 1 year. It was like 2 years ago. And then last year they lost money again. So you're going, this is crazy. Well, if you think it's crazy, you don't quite understand the dynamics of the stock market and the dynamics of investment in the future. There are many of companies, many investors who say, sure, we'll give you loads of money and run and run and run and run until you have a big sustainable business, and then we'll take our profits. I think there's a good lesson in that, and that is, oh, look at the margin. Look at the margins we have in radio. Our margins are 35, 45% EBITDA. Look at the margins they have in some of these digital companies, Angie's List and et cetera, the ones that we had named, Twitter and Snapchat, et cetera. We're better than them. No, you're not. You're not better than them. You just happen to be taking your profits right now. They are reinvesting their money in the future. Take a look at Facebook. Take a look at Google. Facebook and Google combined put more money into R&D last year than the entire radio industry made twofold.
Wow.
It was just so they're great examples because they're actually making money, but the other companies are doing the same. They keep investing in the changing technology, and they're growing and they're growing and they're growing their business. So I wouldn't scoff at these digital businesses that are losing some money. Some of them are pure idiots, and they will disappear off the face of the earth in short order. And so will the investors and their money. They'll just go away. But quite a few of them, I think you'll see turn around pretty quickly when they decide to begin to take profits or they get acquired by somebody else.
It seems like one of your themes is, don't critique the challenges of digital media, recognize the future, and that these challenges of digital media today in terms of money being wasted on certain digital media ads and all of these things work through the pipeline and doesn't change the trajectory of the growth of the platform, right? So ultimately you need to recognize, you can look at a Google Home device or and say, well, I wish there were an FM chip in it. Or you can recognize that there's never going to be an FM chip in that thing and you need to behave accordingly, right?
Yeah, I think there's something really simple to do. I can't, it's my job to study this stuff day in and day out and keep the finger on the pulse of advertisers. And we certainly are doing that right now. We have this survey that's going on and thousands of responses are coming in. And I can tell you what these advertisers are doing now and are going to be doing over the next 6 to 8 months and maybe even predict next year what might happen. So that's my job. I don't have to run a radio station or stop and go out and sell advertising. So how do you or folks out there in radio land understand, or seize these opportunities? I do think it's really simple, and I do think you just follow the money. That's all there is to it. You can't make bets on what's going to happen next. That's really, really difficult, even for me to do, sitting on top of all this research and this data. But I think if you just go, what I've said before is like the blacksmiths of 100 years ago. They thought their job was shoeing horses and fixing carriages, but what they determined was their job was to serve the transportation needs of their community. So they said, well, these are our customers and they need to buy gas, so we're going to sell them gas. And they need to have car service, so we're going to figure out how to service cars. These are your customers. They need help with their social media page. Help them with their social media page. They need help figuring out what SEO is and how it works. Help them with that. And by the way, you also have some radio advertising. Follow the money. Where they're spending their money is where you should be putting your investment.
That was one of your suggestions, right? It essentially get a greater share of customer, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I have a warning for you. I think research, especially today in this world of just phenomenally mass communications, is like a Rorschach test. If you get a piece of information that comes to you and you kind of don't understand or don't like what it says, you're conditioned not to spend time with it and jettison it. If something comes through that supports what you believe and what you feel good or safe about, you're going to believe it to be true. So whenever someone sends to you a couple of emails or you see a headline about ad fraud and ad blocking software, you're going to forward them to other people because you believe that this is what's happening. And you see stories about Google and YouTube, advertisers pulling off of YouTube and, not wanting to be around bad content. And the guy from P&G, who a couple of years ago said, we're going to pull back our digital expenditures. You'll start collecting all anecdotal pieces of evidence that support what you really feel. And then suddenly your reality, which is not reality at all, is that all this digital stuff is collapsing. You have to be really careful and to really be more open-minded about it and think about what's going on. I think digital in a lot of cases is overblown. I think there's a whole lot of fake news out there. And that fake news to the advertiser, to the people that we're surveying right now, is that media is feeding them a bill of goods in the audience data. Audience data, whether it's television or radio or digital, is inflated and it's fake news. I can show you the charts. They're right in front of me, what they're saying. So you have to go in there and be their friend. You have to listen to what they're buying, understand, don't fight them. Don't try to convince them to do all kinds of different things. Listen to what they want. Turn around and try to sell it to them.
Gordon, that's fascinating because I haven't heard that before. So you're saying that the advertisers, the agencies, are increasingly viewing the listening and viewing data they're getting from Nielsen primarily as inflated?
Yeah. Here we go. How can medias help you assess advertising ROI? All the comments that came in were about audience and media companies. And the headline is, prove it. Does that show up backwards or is that right? It says,
that's right.
Advertisers' new demand, prove it. The number one thing that they want out of local media is better data and better metrics to prove the ROI of their advertising. And they're believing. I have loads of comments here. Let me give you one real quick. Here's a great one. Media partners are focused on hitting sales goals and will only present data that supports their products, not what's truly in the advertiser's best interest. In 12 years of being the marketing director here, on only 2 occasions has it happened that a media partner did not recommend their product for my dealership. So there. And this is one of hundreds of comments that are rolling. And these people are pissed. I mean, we're talking about a Donald Trump type revolution here in the electorate of advertisers. So yeah, there's some crazy stuff going on out there. You better have your reps be truthful, and you better have them ready to sell some type of digital services to advertisers because that's what they're wanting and that's what they believe works.
I also think it's interesting. There was a piece from somebody at Nielsen that ran in Media Village last week, and a couple of people forwarded to me, and it was all about the impressive reach of radio all the way down to teens. And I thought, well, that's interesting, and let's suppose that's 100% accurate. So what? Does that change my spend? Does that change my allocation? Is that an effort to say bring the money back to the traditional radio station? Are we trying to change the minds of the clients, in other words? What do you make of that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think advertisers are smarter than most people realize. And it's just very, very natural and intuitive. And that is, if you I'll try not to move so much so the camera doesn't refocus itself automatically. Sorry about that. I feel like I'm on a boat or something. It's the Titanic. That's what it is. We're sinking.
It's a new action adventure called Gordon Borrell in action.
They know when that newspaper rep or that Yellow Pages rep or that radio rep comes in the door, that rep isn't going to say something bad about the newspaper readership or the radio listenership. And they also know that your numbers are going to be inflated because it's your incentive to do so. Mm-hmm. When you get your radio data and your numbers and your listenership, are you going to go with the lowest number? Are you going to add up all the numbers you can to make yourself? You're going to go with the biggest number you possibly can. The advertisers see that. They see through that. So they're listening with, I think, a very healthy dose of skepticism. So it's incumbent then, I think, in today's world where we have so much access to data, and the advertisers really, really believe that they know what's working and what's not working, that it's really incumbent upon the radio rep to be as truthful as they possibly can and say, yeah, some of this stuff is working. How revolutionary would it be for a radio rep to go in and say, yeah, you might want to buy some cable advertising. And, the newspaper still works. You might want to do that. Go back and watch Miracle on 34th Street with Santa Claus recommending that they go to gimbals, right, instead of aces. And realize the power of that. You truly become a friend that has that advertiser's best interest at heart. One final chart happens to be sitting in front of me. It's reliance on gut versus data from about 2,000 advertisers, local advertisers, happening right now. All the orange lines in this chart at the top are reliance more on data, and the orange lines are all digital media. Everything regarding how they buy advertising, relying on gut, is all traditional media, and radio is right in there as well. So they're relying on gut to buy radio advertising and everything else, and they're relying on facts, they think, not always true, to buy digital media. So the rep has to really bridge that and understand that phenomenon.
Isn't it interesting then, just the same, that we're in a time where the ratings are such that there's so little variation between the top ranked station and the one ranked 10 notches below that it almost no longer matters whether the ratings go up to a degree, because you've still got the same sales challenge that you had when the ratings didn't go up to that same degree. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
it almost comes back to the same place, whereas the emphasis in the industry seems to be, let's communicate the value of the Nielsen numbers, let's make the Nielsen numbers as accurate as they can. And what you're talking about is a perspective that says, Nielsen, Schmielsen, I'm beyond that onto something else and you're behind me.
Oh, absolutely. And it worries me. I think the agencies still certainly look at that data and buy, and some of the bigger advertisers in the marketplace, and certainly the national to local advertisers and the franchise guys do, which seems like quite a lot. But 40% of all advertising is bought by local or direct businesses across the entire country. And these guys are not buying on audience metrics, or buying much, much less on audience. They're less and less and less impressed by your numbers of how many people you reach, because they know there's a lot of fluff in them. Ad fraud extends to radio as much as digital, and television and newspapers and everything else. What they want, and it's at the top of the charts that we see, what they want is ROI, prove it. They'll make a decision on whether to buy based on whether it worked. So they might try it once. They're not going to try it again if it doesn't work. So it's really incumbent on the media company to make sure whatever it is they're doing works, because the advertiser is forming a perception. So if it doesn't work, I don't care how big your audience numbers are and how much you're rated number one. If it doesn't really work, they're not going to come back.
And interestingly, the inverse of that is if the numbers are lower and it does work, then you have the opposite problem from the agencies, right? Because you can get the direct business, but not the agencies.
Well, the internet's really a massive niches, and it's really taught us that you can pay a much higher CPM, say for a Facebook ad, because it's really, really targeted, but it's so targeted that you get a higher response rate to it. And the responses actually, in some cases, and Facebook's probably a bad example, the responses actually buy. So it's the way we put it is that advertisers are less and less, and this is a really, really scary observation, they're less and less interested in an audience, and they're more and more interested in a buyer. And the thing that you see clearly is people aggregating around these digital channels like cars.com or autotrader.com or home advisor, or these are people ready to buy something, a car, a home, home landscaping services, or things like that. And the advertisers are paying premium to be there. So suddenly with digital, over the past 20 years, you have much, much greater ability to target. Mass means less to people. Where mass comes in, which you do have with traditional media, particularly broadcast TV and radio to a great extent, is the ability to drive awareness to something in digital. If you look at the Yellow Pages book, if you look at some of the radio advertising that's out there, you see and television advertising, you see an awful lot of the pure play internet companies advertising. They're driving traffic to their own specific vertical channels.
It's my observation, and maybe this is wrong, from your perspective, but I still feel like a lot of radio advertising doesn't push people to a digital end point. That a lot of it is brand based or promotional without any kind of digital linkage. Is that accurate, or is it really on the rise and I'm just not hearing it?
No, I think it's accurate, and I also think that there's really not much wrong with that. A good commercial for A1 American or for Jiffy Lube or for 7-Eleven or McDonald's or whatever, it's good branding, and it tells you Subway, for instance, has a big special, on footlongs or whatever. And so you go in that night to Subway and you buy. It doesn't necessarily have to have a digital promotion in every single ad. However, if there is, and more this is the case, if there is some digital interaction or digital activation, such as go to subway.com and get the coupon, then absolutely it should be in there. And more we're seeing that. It might not be a simple buy like, go to McDonald's and do this or go to Subway and do that, particularly with the more complicated, higher price purchases, such as, plumbing, LASIK, things that require a lot of explanation, LASIK surgery, a lot of the elective surgery categories, things like that. They typically are not saying, hey, we're a great LASIK surgeon, call us today, and that's it. They're saying also, come visit us because they know there's a lot more information required before somebody decides to buy or if somebody tries to figure out where the location is.
But even at that point, now you've created a metric that is accountable.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, if they know that spot aired, in drive time on a Thursday, they're going to look at their Google Analytics and see whether it actually worked.
In the time remaining, I just want to get as specific as we can about kind of the difference between those who are getting it and doing it and those who aren't. What are kind of the best practices associated with those people who really get it the best? What are the things that, the 3 or 4 things that you would advise a broadcaster to do to emulate those people, become those people?
Well, we did some research about a year and a half ago that I think was designed to say, here's how you can kind of tell whether a company really gets it. And that's a little bit of a cruel term, so I apologize for that. But this is fun to do anyway. First off, the ones who get it understand that digital cannot be so tightly integrated with their core product. And there's a lot of people that think that's baloney, and really, really smart people who years ago thought it was baloney and then realized that it's not. So it's not baloney. It really does need to have a separate staff, maybe reporting into the core structure, but separate people, separate investment. So here's a litmus test for you. If your company has a digital initiative, does the digital initiative have its own product name? Or is it just WXYZ digital something or other? Does it have its own logo? Does it have a sign that is visible to the public out on the street? And it might be underneath the station logo. So for all these things in a lot of radio stations, it's no, 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 and no. But you go to a company like Entercom, and they've got a separate company. It's called Smart Reach Digital. And you go to Hubbard Broadcasting, and they've got 2060 Digital. 2060 Digital operates like separate agencies in each of their markets, and they're building a new business. They're not just empowering the radio reps to go sell a little extra digital stuff to the radio advertisers. They're going after people who just won't advertise in radio, which, by the way, is about 95% of any business community does not advertise in radio.
In that case, it's a market-centric view of the world, or actually a client-centric view of the world, rather than a brand-centric view of the world, right? A radio brand-centric view.
Yeah. So, I think there have to be in-house experts that understand digital to the nth degree and, could go head-to-head with anybody else in the market who does nothing but sell digital advertising, doesn't know anything at all about radio. The leg up is that, more about marketing probably than, the fool in the market who's just selling websites and search engine optimization and things like that. So I think that's one thing, is that you need to, I think you do need to have a digital product. It does need to have a separate name. Probably at the very least needs to have a logo on the business card that's separate, or maybe a completely separate business card to say, look, yes, we have a digital marketing company, and it's named this, and this is what it does. That's pretty damn impressive.
Mm-hmm.
And that tells the advertiser, well, this isn't just a radio guy who is going to say SEO, SEM, so social media marketing, we got it all, buy from me.
Mm-hmm.
This is somebody who really knows their stuff.
Give me a couple others, things that separate the men from the boys in the category.
I think that the product set is important. It's not just banner ads. Banner ads are kind of going by the wayside, except for really a level of other digital services. It's social media management, and it's a deep understanding of social media. I think if you looked at your radio station's Facebook page and the number of likes it had, and maybe compared it to a couple of others in other markets in your own market, and if you have 4, 5, 10, 20 times the amount of likes or followers, you kind of get it. Somebody at your station kind of understands it, and that's a very leverageable asset. People really want to spend money with Facebook, and they're beginning to spend lots of money. On average, last year it was about $3,500 per local advertiser.
Mm-hmm.
This year it might be $4,500 to $5,000. Some are spending tens of thousands of dollars, and they're looking for somebody who can help them. And they're not going to go to a radio station that doesn't really understand how to use Twitter or Facebook, and the numbers don't lie. Oh yeah, we got a Facebook fan page. It's got 150 followers. Wow, you suck. So I think it's how are you managing your own company's internet presence, whether it's an app and all the different things you do, and on social media and everything you do. And you can't say, oh yeah, we're there. There's a measurement for all of that.
Mm-hmm.
How many followers do you have? How many likes do you get when you post something? How much interactivity do you get? I think that's another litmus test. How well can you do it for your own business? Vince Benedetto, Bogold Media, I think I've talked about him before in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. That guy makes a science of having millions of interactions in Wilkes-Barre, for God's sake, millions of interactions on their Facebook page. And that, again, is the nectar that gets a lot of advertisers say, hey, can you tell me how to do that? Well, when he gets his reps to tell him how to do that, guess what else his reps are also selling him? Radio advertising. So there, it's the nectar.
Interesting. It's interesting that in many cases that's a task that's kind of farmed out to the talent, and the equation is the talent good at social or not? And then we gauge kind of the brand's social effectiveness based on how effective the talent is at social. And being lost in that equation is how it appears to clients outside and the decisions they make about their advertising partner, because if the advertising partner should theoretically be practicing what they preach, right?
Yeah, I do think it's a marketing or advertising task, and it is a task that you can charge money for. When you look at a lot of these companies that have started their own digital agencies, or that might be too strong a name from a digital marketing arm, radio stations, there are a few things that they sell, and they sell a lot of, and they sell well. One of them is website redesign. Oddly enough, that's important. That's important to advertisers to get. Nobody likes the way their website looks. The other is search engine optimization, which is a really, really big one. The other is social media management or reputation management, managing, if somebody gives you bad reviews out there. So all of those things kind of put together can be sold as a package of digital marketing that, again, gets amplified by radio advertising. And trust me, the cable guys are doing the same thing, and the television guys are doing the same thing, and the newspaper guys are doing the same thing. So if your reps aren't doing that, you're seen as kind of behind. Oh, those are the radio guys. We'll buy radio advertising if my newspaper rep, whom we trust to do all this digital stuff, recommends it. How screwy is that? So you don't really want to be in that position.
I feel like that's one of the implicit messages that some of the publicity, the PR for the radio industry suffers from, namely that all of this other stuff exists outside of radio. Here are the great things about radio in its traditional over-the-air advertising reach form. All that other stuff is a separate conversation. And I feel like, wouldn't it be stronger to say, here's how you can get all the reach and all this other stuff too, and you don't have to sacrifice?
Yeah, I would agree to an extent. I wouldn't put it on the industry itself. I mean, it's too broad.
Right.
I
True.
do think it's I
Very
do
true.
think it's the company and it's the reps. If you want somebody to turn around the way advertisers feel about radio, train the reps better because they're your front line and they're out there every day. Here's the scariest thing to me about running any business, but particularly a media business. You can have a newspaper with a huge multi-million-dollar printing press and hundreds of trucks that go 40, 50, 60 miles out delivering these newspapers and a giant expensive newsroom and all kinds of other support resources and things like that. Your entire business rests on a rep who goes out and talks to that florist and says stupid things. It's the same thing for radio, and it's the same thing for television. Your entire business, your great content, your great morning program, the cool announcers, the cool afternoon guys, the contests that you have and everything, that all goes to hell if the rep can't sell. Hey, that rhymes. It all goes to hell if that rep is just an idiot out in the marketplace. He can ruin hundreds of thousands of dollars of business by just turning off one advertiser who says, I'll never do business with them again. It might not come back for a year or two. And that's the really scary thing, is that I don't think we realize how important those frontline reps are to the entire industry.
Well, that's the good part of that, is that we can talk about kind of the automation of the advertising buying process, but what you've just outlined is a role for human beings interacting with other human beings in local markets.
Yeah, they've always said, that local advertising is sold, it's not bought. But that is actually changing to some degree. There are more and more advertisers buying advertising late at night, after 11 o'clock at night with their credit card on Google or on Facebook. But I do think they're susceptible to influence and that they do need a certain level of touch that these pure play companies can't give because they're not putting people physically in the market. And I think that's traditional media's leg up, is that you're going to see these people at the synagogue, at church, at the ball field, at the Kiwanis Club meeting, and you're going to be able to interact with them. You're going to say, hey, I got something you really need to try. And trust me, I'll see you next week on the soccer field, and, you can punch me in the nose if it didn't work. I took $10,000 of your money, and I told you this stuff would work. Google can't do that, and Facebook can't do that. So it's the legs of those 16,000 sales reps that work for radio stations across this country, going out and spreading this message that I think is so vital to the industry, that they're properly trained and that they know how important it is to represent not only the station but the advertiser and do well by that advertiser.
Gordon, last question, really. What has your research told you about the role of podcasts in the local media mix? I mean, where right now, as you know, where that stuff is monetized, it's largely direct response, in part based on the data available and in part based on, I guess that's the low-hanging fruit of the advertising industry. But where do you see that in the scheme?
I think there's a great hope in the radio industry that podcasts will be it, or something that will be big. And that has somewhat confused me, but I think the reason is that it's really easy to understand. It's radio. It's recorded radio on demand. That's what it is.
Yeah.
So it's the easiest thing to understand and thus generate some excitement because, hell, you've got programming. You can record it. You've got audio equipment and shabam, I'm in business. Here's the problem. It's just really, really basic. None of the data that I see from advertisers, and again, we're just focused on the locals, none of the data I see from advertisers says, yes, I want that. Oh, that is so great. I will buy that. So that worries me. If you're not getting advertisers to pay for it, who are you going to get to pay for it? And don't be deluded into thinking people are going to pay you for podcasts. They're not. They're just not. There'll be a little bit, but there's just not enough financial support for it there. My other worry is that, as in all digital formats, the real estate for advertising is very, very limited. With a 30-minute television spot, a 30-minute television program, you can have several dozen commercial spots. Now take that to the video, digital video format. How many commercial spots can you have? And can you have 30 minutes? If it is 30 minutes, there damn well will be no commercials in it because you're going to buy it, right? It's a program. But if it's a 3-minute video, which is long, you might tolerate a 15 or 20-second spot up front. That's not enough to pay the freight for the production of that or the licensing of that content. It's the same way with podcasts. It just worries me that you're just not going to get significant dollars out of that until some type of business model changes. They're becoming very popular. The audience is growing, and thus the dollars should grow. But I think the availability of and the value of advertising spots within podcasts isn't enough to really excite me and say, wow, that's going to be a really big business in the next 2 or 3 or 4 years. I think it's got a lot more maturing, a lot more development of the business model before anything significant happens from an advertising perspective.
And here to be clear, you're talking about this from the perspective of a local media company, right?
Yeah, not national. There's a lot of really interesting national podcasts out there that can carry some pretty heavy national dollars. But from a local station's perspective, I think local stations are generally going to be pretty lost in this environment.
Okay. Gordon, I want to give you an opportunity to tell people how they can get more information about your new report.
Sure. Thank you for doing that. Just go to the website, BorrellAssociates.com, Borrell, and you'll see a couple of things up there. If you look under research, you'll see our industry papers, and the report is promoted there. But you'll also see a slot that's a link up there for surveys. We have our ongoing survey. You might be interested in some of the information from our surveys or even participating in the survey. The survey runs from April the 3rd through the end of June. It's really inexpensive and very turnkey. We've lowered the price down to $500 per market. If you got 5 or more markets, we'll do it for $250, just because we think the information that comes from it is just so incredibly valuable. We want to get it out there to folks. So encourage you to participate in the survey and then take a look at the benchmarking stuff that we've got too, which is really good. It helps you get some perspective on where you should be with digital dollars in your organization.
Gordon Borrell, thank you for your time today and for sharing your amazing insights and research on the local digital advertising space. It's really invaluable, and thank you for doing it.
Mark, thanks for having me, and I wish great luck to an industry I love dearly, and I listen to probably an hour and a half a day into and back from work radio. Love it. Thanks,
You're a heavy
Mark.
listener. Thank you.
I am. Thank you.